Hello, friends. Welcome back to my channel, Harmonic Resonance 101. It's good to see you again. Today, I want to talk about something kind of personal. I want to talk about a problem that I'd like to address with this channel. And it's a personal problem for me, but I hope that it's one that resonates with other people that eventually see this content. For as long as I can remember, I've felt like something was wrong with me. I felt like there were parts of me that I would never find healing for. The parts of me that I didn't like and I wished that I could fix. Parts that I struggled with over and over, repeatedly repeating these same patterns of behavior, even when I didn't want to, when it was the last thing I wanted to do. It was as if I couldn't control my own behavior. I kept making choices over and over again that I did not want to make. And something changed recently. I don't pretend to know fully what brought it all into alignment, but a lot of things kind of coalesced into what I can only liken to an epiphany or a waking up experience, some form of enlightenment or satori that allowed me to pierce the veil that had been created by so many mental constructions over the course of my life, owing to all the conditioning I had been subjected to. I suffered for a lot of years with severe anxiety, with depression, with an inability to regulate my own emotions. I couldn't deal with normal problems in my life. And because of this, I had developed many coping mechanisms throughout my life, such as substance abuse, sexual compulsions, and a strong tendency towards people pleasing and neglecting my own needs. Because I mistakenly thought that if I could hide my needs, that others would approve more readily of me and that they would be willing to be in a relationship with me. Because I mistakenly thought that people wouldn't want that if they thought I had needs. More generally, I just have always, well, for a long time, lacked any real direction in this life. I've kind of aimlessly wandered, following the path of least resistance, never actually trying anything fully, never really committing to anything because I didn't know what I wanted to commit to, because I didn't know who I was. As I said, I engaged in a lot of people pleasing, a lot of caretaking, and a lot of self-neglect. I would worry and ruminate incessantly to the point where I likely took years off my life because of the cortisol levels constantly flowing through my bloodstream. Everything external and even many internal things like my emotions became threats, and I lacked any real resources to know how to deal with these things. This left me feeling very hopeless, like I was just destined to always have these struggles and that it was just the way I was. that, as I said, something was wrong with me. Maybe you can relate to these struggles. Or maybe you have a completely different set of issues that cause you distress in your life and that you've not been able to make much progress in despite repeated effort. If so, I'd like to just share some things lately that have been helping me quite a bit, in the hopes that somewhere out there, someone will hear this and it will lead them down a similar path that I've been walking, a path of healing the parts of me that have been hurting for so long, that needed someone to come in and give them what they needed. But I never felt equipped to do that before. So the first thing I'd like to share is something called internal family systems therapy. This is something I stumbled across on YouTube. Shout out to Dr. Tori Olds. It's a system of therapy that sees our internal world as a system of parts, a collection of parts. Maybe you've seen the movie Inside Out or the sequel. These movies heavily draw from internal family systems therapy. The different parts in Riley's mind represent these archetypal parts of our psyches that develop throughout our lives. Different parts of us that correspond to different brain functions. There's a part of us that is driven primarily by fear, and it's associated with parts of our brain that are responsible for scanning our environment for threats. And in a healthy person, the system is not a problem. It's actually a very good thing for us to have in order to survive, because it allows us to accurately assess threats and respond to them accordingly. The problem is that often these parts become out of alignment. They become imbalanced, where certain parts which get used more than others will be stronger, in the same way that if you skip leg day, your legs will atrophy and they will not balance with the rest of your body. Just as a disclaimer, I'm not a professional. I don't know if IFS will help you, but I know that it's been instrumental in my own journey. And if it can help one person seek out a different paradigm, a different way of viewing themselves, to seek out resources to meet the demands of whatever it is they're trying to break through, then this video will have been worth it. I think we're very complex beings, and what works for me and allows me to gain clarity and awareness to begin to find some light in the darkness may not work for someone else. Because I have a whole history of experiences that have brought me to a place where this idea resonates with me on a very fundamental level. So much so that when I sat and watched Inside Out 2 with my daughter, it affected me very deeply. I had a visceral emotional response to that movie, and especially the climactic scene where Riley basically floods her mind with all of the repressed thoughts that she had cast to the back of her mind previously. And in so doing, Riley is faced with a lot of contradictory thoughts and feelings about herself and her place in the world and her relationships. And this necessitated a very radical transformation in her sense of self. Previously, as a child, she had a very simple conception of herself as a good person. Then, as she got older, there were experiences she had that challenged this or added some complexity to this sense of self. Then came a moment where her sense of self became the idea that she was not good enough. And I think we can all probably relate to that. This feeling that you're not living up to your potential and that someone, maybe your own mind, is judging you and finding you lacking. So before I had ever even found IFS, I had this very emotional response watching this movie, not knowing there was science behind this, that there were practical strategies involved in this very whimsical and entertaining film. Prior to finding IFS, I had tried all kinds of things. And I don't discount all of the different methods I've found over the course of my life. But one of the things I noticed that I was missing was doing things. I was so obsessed with collecting information and analyzing and intellectualizing everything I absorbed that I never took the time to actually try these things out that I was learning, to see if they worked, to see what the results would be if I tried these things. So upon finding IFS and realizing that it included some very basic strategies to attempt to make some headway in building a holistic view of myself that was not based on my thought patterns or my emotions, but based on something deeper, something fundamental to who I am, I began to actually attempt to implement these very simple strategies in moments where I felt emotionally overwhelmed. I'll add a link in the description to a couple of videos that were very helpful to me because I don't want to go through the process of trying to walk you through them right now. I don't think that's really what I'm aiming for in this moment. I just want to share it because it, along with a couple of other things that have come into my life lately, have been instrumental in changing the way I think and behave and the way I view myself and others and the world. A fundamental concept in IFS that I'm fascinated by is this idea of a true self or a core self. The true self is the real you. If you have any experience with mindfulness practices or meditation or yoga or Zen or any of these disciplines, you'll be familiar with the concept of a higher self or witness consciousness or the big mind. All these terms, in my opinion, are referring to what IFS calls the true self, the one in our minds that can see our emotions and inner states, but is not those states. For instance, when I'm afraid, the true self is the one who knows I'm afraid, the one who sees the fear, because in the same way that our eyes can't see themselves, fear, the part of us, cannot see the fear, because it's just what it is. But our true self is able to see the fear, but not be it, ideally. Unfortunately, what often happens somewhere along the way in our lives is we develop a tendency to blend with that part. We become the fear, and the fear is all we know. And we have lots of different parts of us, and at different points, because of different external stimuli, we can blend with different parts. We can blend with the angry part, right? If we go back to the movie Inside Out, you can liken this to the different emotions in Riley's mind taking control of the control panel. So when joy is in control of the control panel, Riley's happy. She feels joy. She's light and buoyant, and all these positive feelings come from being blended with that part. And when fear is in control of the control panel, Riley feels fear. And normally, these parts have their place, and when the moment passes, these parts step back and allow a different part to take control when it needs to, and they all share this control equally, and there's a balance. And ideally, the true self is the one who sits above all these parts, making sure that none of the parts get too out of balance, out of alignment, that none of them seize too much control over that control panel in our mind. But what's problematic about our true self becoming blended with any part is that essentially that part runs the show at that point. The true self disappears. There is no one in charge. And all we know is the fear. It blinds us completely to any other part of us, to anything greater than us. The fear becomes everything. So as I sat with these thoughts and tried to understand how they applied to me and how I could utilize them in this journey that I've been on, a lot of things started happening. Now when I would feel a strong emotion, I would find myself remembering these strategies that IFS advocates. And I would use these tools and practices to gain clarity as to the source of the emotions by asking, what emotion am I feeling right now? And this is where another concept comes in called ruler. The ruler method essentially helps to, it's a nice acronym that helps you to remember a very good strategy for regulating emotions. Ruler stands for recognize, understand, label, express, regulate. And so, using this framework and IFS, I began to ask, what emotion am I feeling? First, recognizing that I'm feeling an emotion, understanding what brought this emotion on, what influences in my life, in my environment, in my internal world were responsible for creating this emotion, and then labeling my emotion. Now, this is a big one, and it's super critical because someone told me that most people can label 3 emotions if you ask them, generally: happy, sad, and mad. But using the ruler method and an accompanying application that they developed, I was able to start building some more language around emotion, some granularity within emotions, and beginning to develop skills to differentiate between different emotions, but also distinguish very similar emotions that often are confused. For instance, what would you say the difference between disappointment and anger are? Most people intuitively feel like they know the difference, but when you try to put it into words, it can often betray a limited understanding of the differences between the two. Anger is often about a perceived injustice, while disappointment tends to be about unmet needs. And if we're not clear on that, we can sometimes confuse emotions, and this can lead to problematic behaviors. We can be feeling something like disappointment or discouragement, and if we have a limited emotional intelligence and a limited language to understand those emotions, then we can become confused and reach for one of our limited, we can reach for one of our few emotions we do understand. And so what may have been discouragement or disappointment can be expressed as anger. And this can lead to a lot of confusion, both for ourselves and others around us. So, once we've recognized the emotion, we've tried to understand it, its origin, why we're feeling it, and label it, then we're at a very interesting spot with regard to internal family systems where we can then begin to unblend the true self from this part of us. And what this is like experientially is if you imagine something right up in your face, like I'm talking right up in there, right in your space, all up in your grill, it kind of blocks your entire vision. You can't see anything else but it. And this is what it's like for us to be blended with a part of us. That part is right up close. It's whoa intense, very strong, and it blocks out everything else. When you're blended with fear, you become fear. Everything around you is a threat. Everything is scary. The world is scary. Other people are scary. You're scared of yourself, scared of your thoughts, scared of your emotions. And then once we begin to walk down this path of understanding and labeling our emotions, it allows us a tiny bit of space where we can bring that emotion away from our face and bring it out at arm's length to separate it from ourselves and unblend. And then we can ask ourselves, how do I feel about this part of me? And often it can help to visualize this part. Fear is a good example for me because it's a very strong part of me that I've struggled with for many years. But we look at the fear and we visualize it as whatever comes to mind, whatever feels right, whatever you resonate with. For me, it helps to visualize the fear as a little kid, as a younger me, curled in a ball in the corner with their head hidden, trying to hide from all of the scary things in the world that they don't know how to handle. And then the next question that internal family systems would have you ask yourself is, how do you feel towards that part of you? How do you feel towards that little kid in the corner, crying, begging for someone to help them? And maybe you feel ashamed. Maybe you feel angry with them even. Maybe you feel disappointed by them. All of these emotions are an indication that the true self is still blended with a part. The disappointment, the anger, the shame, these all correspond to different parts. And if that is our genuine response to how we feel about the scared child in the corner, then we still need to keep going. And we need to unblend from that part. And what you'll find is that at some point in this process, there won't be any more parts to unblend from. Eventually, when you ask yourself, how do I feel towards this part? You'll say something along the lines of, I feel compassion. I feel love. I feel empathy. I want to, walk up and give it a hug. I want to reassure it that we can get through this, that we have the resources to handle it. And that, my friend, is when you know that the true self has become fully unblended and is seated in its proper place above the other parts. And that, my friend, is how you know the true self has adequately unblended and now sits in its proper place above the parts. And this is where religious people, I think, can find some resonance with the idea that God sits above us, orchestrating all things. He is the ultimate self. Hindus would say Brahman. There's lots of words for the true self in various religions. But ultimately, everything seems to be about these nested layers, this enfolded reality of an incredible complexity. And we are no exception. So, assuming you can get to this place where the true self is in its rightful place, you'll notice some qualities that arise that you feel. And a good way to remember them is something IFS calls the 8 C's. The 8 C's of the true self are compassion, creativity, curiosity, connection, courage, confidence, clarity, and calm. So, a really good way to test yourself to see if you're blended or if the true self is rightfully in its place is to ask yourself, do I feel these qualities? Do I feel compassionate, creative, connected, confident, calm, clear, courageous, and curious? Or do I not? This has become a very useful litmus test for me to keep coming back to. Because if I don't feel all those feelings, then it's a very, very strong indicator that the true self is becoming blended again. And it's a habit. It's a very, very strong habit I've developed. And so it's not going to just stop without a lot of practice and consistent effort on my part. I have to relearn how to keep the true self in its place. Because it's the most natural thing. It's what we're designed to do and be. But we have participated in our own conditioning and in distorting the proper place of all these parts and of the true self. Harmonic resonance, aligning vibrations, elevating consciousness.